Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Daily Block Party. We are excited to have Priyanka Desai join us as a guest today. Priyanka is the Vice President of Operations and Business Development at Open Law. Welcome, Priyanka. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so what is your background and how did you get into cryptocurrency?
That's a good question. So I actually used to live in DC and I worked on a committee on Capitol Hill and found Bitcoin quite interesting from a political perspective, not so much as a technologist. Thought it was interesting to have a currency emerge outside of central banking. It's something that my family and I would often discuss at home, and thought it was pretty fascinating. So I just continued to read a little bit here and there. There was a few people, in the political realm that had been discussing it a bit. So just kept up to date with that, and then ended up in law school where I thought it'd be interesting to write a paper on Bitcoin. Actually was reached out to the co-founder of Open Law, Aaron Wright, about co-authoring or at least supervising my paper. He introduced me to Ethereum smart contracts. I wrote about that, and then eventually, sort of the rest is history. I worked for him, and he would always kind of kick me the blockchain projects and the blockchain companies. So I did some legal work for them, and then worked at the New York State Department of Financial Services in the Capital Markets Division that did the bit licensing work. The DAO happened, and then the ICO boom happened, and the whole space emerged. Spent some time my last year in law school at R3, which is the Blockchain Financial Consortium, and then joined the Open Law team quickly thereafter. So it's been a crazy ride since the technology kind of was released after 2008, 2009. So a lot has happened in the last 10 years.
So just so our listeners understand, you mentioned a DAO. What is the DAO and what is the LAO?
Sure. So the DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. A DAO is just really any organization that is pooled of members in using blockchain as the back end, if you will. The DAO was a project that happened in 2016 where several hundreds of people all over the world decided to pool Ethereum together. They raised upward, I think, of $158 million in ETH. They then decided to create a governance structure where they would vote on what projects to fund that would further the Ethereum ecosystem. It was a pretty novel and pretty incredible use case of Ethereum at the time. Unfortunately, it ran afoul to a few technical issues. There was a technical vulnerability, but in addition to that, there was some legal issues as well. The DAO token ended up being deemed a security under U.S. securities law. So that project didn't necessarily quite hit the home run that everyone wanted to. However, the intention was good, and there was a lot of thought around this idea of putting capital in courts together and creating governance structure and really trying to vote on how to deploy that capital. So with those learnings, we at Open Law realized that we had the technical tools and the legal acumen to really kind of have a revival of this project. We decided then to create a LAO, which stands for Limited Liability Autonomous Organization. So we effectively did the DAO, but decided to have some sort of limited liability wrapper around that, so an LLC wrapper. We are launching that on April 28th, so not too long from now. But the idea is very similar to the original DAO. We want, in this case, upwards of 100 members to pull together 120 ETH to then invest in projects in the Ethereum ecosystem. They can vote on that using tokens, and everything is above board, legal. We're really going by the books and making sure that we're following U.S. securities law. So that's really the project. It's really an ode to the original DAO, and we think this is an excellent kind of killer app for Ethereum.
What kinds of projects might flourish under the LAO model?
Yeah, so I mean, since Open Law really is the software administrator here, we're kind of helping with the legal documents and structuring it in a way that is very much member managed. We didn't really want to put too much thinking in that, and so we have kind of created an investment thesis that allows the members to really have some flexibility on how they want to invest their funds. So right now we've kept it very open-ended in that any Ethereum project can apply. And the members can vote on it, but that could really take form in different ways. So if members want to focus on projects in the DeFi ecosystem, they're able to do so. So it's kind of one of those things where it's going to be very interesting to see where the members take their investment thesis and how they decide to actually deploy the funds. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that's going to operate.
So who are some of the members and who are some of the projects that are in the pipeline?
Yeah, so we've had a really interesting group of members. We've we haven't, of course, the membership hasn't fully been confirmed. We've had several applications. So right now, we've opened up for the accreditation process, meaning if you are a prospective member, you can submit all of the relevant information, ID and all that, so we can kind of wrap up the KYC and AML checks prior to the launch. So the membership actually hasn't been determined fully yet. Of course, we've had several different individuals. We've had trusts, VCs, early Ethereum adopters, a really wide range of folks who have applied. And so once that opens up on the 28th, it'll be a first come, first serve situation. So once that opens up, people can purchase their unit in the LAO, but the membership hasn't fully been crystallized yet. And then as far as the projects that have applied, we've had about 20 plus, maybe 25 plus projects apply already. They've provided their pitch deck, their financials, and really like the projects that have applied have really ranged from like the ideation phase to people with prototypes. So it's a nice range, and especially now in light of some of the funding with traditional VC in light of the coronavirus, we're getting even like a larger uptick in amazing projects. So I don't want to fully share all the projects because it's really up to them, but to share whether or not they've applied. But it's there's some pretty cool projects in the pipeline. I'm seeing a lot of like DeFi related projects actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what about how does the voting mechanism work?
So we have extended something called the Moloch DAO smart contract. So they were originally used for grants, and we on our team working with Moloch and the Metacartel folks have extended those smart contracts. So those are all public and they have been diligenced by consensus diligence, but that's really where the voting mechanism lies. And what's really interesting about this is although the Moloch contracts actually allow you to vote, but you can also, if you're not necessarily happy with the fund or would like to have your capital to hang on or do something else with it, you're able to rage quit using the Moloch V2 smart contracts and take any undeployed capital using those smart contracts.
And when do you get a return on your deployed capital?
That really just depends, I guess, on the liquidation event. I guess it would operate, pretty similarly to any other venture capital investment, I think. So who knows? Yeah, depends on the startup.
Okay. What do you think about MakerDAO in general?
I think what they're doing is pretty amazing. We've worked quite a bit with them. I think that they're probably, if you look at even the Ethereum transaction volume, a lot of that has to do with some of the work that makers, what people using Maker, and I think it's really important. It'll be interesting to see how some of the central bank digital currency stuff emerges and how that'll interplay with some of the work Maker has done and other stable coins. So I think it's probably one of my favorite projects in crypto, I would say, especially Ethereum. So I really like the project and it's an amazing team. So
you were involved with the New York Bit license. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so I spent a summer there. I thought it was, it was quite early on. Part of the reason that I decided to, work there was because it was one of the few regulatory agencies at the time that was really talking about this, or talking about virtual currency. So I think at the time, Gemini, I was there, I think the summer, Ripple and Gemini just got their bit license, which is crazy. But just because so much time is, not much time has passed, but those both companies have grown pretty tremendously. But yeah, it's, there's a lot of controversy around the bit license. I know that there are a lot of folks rethinking that, which I personally think makes a ton of sense. But I learned a lot. It was a great team. And I love that. An interesting kind of anecdote that I learned there was, I think it makes, for any startup or any emerging company really, it makes sense to kind of work in lockstep with regulators. And I think for your own success and theirs, I think it just makes, and for the whole ecosystem, I tend to think that the Uber model of just asking for forgiveness later is not necessarily the approach I would take. So I will say, I think from that vantage point, I learned that regulators are willing and able to talk to people. And so it's really important that companies kind of take advantage of that.
So speaking of asking for forgiveness, Libra just announced that they are doing away with the concept of the basket, stablecoin pegged to a basket of currencies, and instead they're launching one-on-ones. What's your view on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I skimmed it a little bit. There wasn't a tremendous amount of information. I don't know if you got that. They were working closely with some central banks on, backing it with certain bank deposits and the like. I think it's pretty interesting. I think it's going to shake things up quite a bit. I'm very keen to learn more. I don't know. Again, I think that's going to also have an interesting interplay with both maker and if there is an emergence of like central bank digital currencies. I'm really curious to see how that will work. Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts too, just because it's very different than what we've seen, and it really is reliant on like what traditional banking is doing. So it's a bit unique.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been such a run up in stablecoin volume, and the basket was always probably considered a sacrificial lamb, and now Libra doesn't want to be left out of that run up. So it's more of a positioning themselves to lead consultants to central banks on how to do it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I actually think central banks are probably okay with that. I think they'd rather see how Libra kind of the coin works and see how it develops, and then kind of take those learnings and apply it themselves. So I don't think it's a bad approach, but definitely seems like their support of that has a little bit to do with that.
You mentioned at the beginning that you got into this space early on and you had discussions with family members about it. I'm curious, amidst everything going on with the pandemic, what have you seen in terms of interest from whether your friends or other colleagues who don't work in this space in terms of Bitcoin, crypto, Ethereum? What has their interest been like? Have you seen more or less? Have there been any key themes that you've seen?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, a lot of my friends ranging from those in fashion to those that are in traditional finance, I think they always were intrigued by crypto. I think there's been definitely more interest. I think after, the ICO boom, there was definitely a ton of interest. I remember, checking my phone and would get texts just like, tell me about this. How do I get involved? Or how do I download, Bitcoin? So I think the onboarding definitely happened quite a bit then. I do think those in traditional finance have seen how like wild the markets are, and how, the Fed and other central banks have been printing a tremendous amount of cash that seems infinite at this point. I think many of them see crypto as a hedge or the crypto markets as a hedge against that. So I think those individuals who've kind of ignored it or have at least kind of watch it from afar are now themselves putting money in. I've also seen some people on Twitter say that they're using their stimulus check on crypto, which I don't know if that's wise, but I think that there are definitely some younger people that are also getting involved. My sister, who is in her early 20s, was mentioning to me that many of her friends own crypto and they're actually buying more now. So yeah, I mean, I also would imagine that some of the stimulus money will trickle down into the crypto markets as well.
why do you think it's important for women to be part of this industry?
Because if not, then they're losing out on a tremendous amount of wealth creation and a lot of innovation, and possibly like the future of finance. I think a lot of people use the term fintech, but a lot of what is under the fintech umbrella is virtual payments, and a lot of what is a part of virtual payments, which is really everything, is blockchain and everything around that. I think it's still fairly early, and so I think there's plenty of opportunity for women to get involved and learn about the technology. I think part of the reason that there is a lack of women involved right now at this phase is because it is early, and unfortunately there are very few software developers that are female, which is unfortunate, but I think is a reality of it. So I think that's like the systemic issue, because at this point it's very engineer developer focused. I think hopefully that'll turn around and I hope more female engineers will get involved. But beyond that, I think a lot of those products are coming to real production. And I think at that point, we're going to get to see more women involved. But I do think it's important for women to get involved, simply because yeah, this is going to be the future in my view. So, or at least an extension of the internet. So yeah, would like to see more women involved.
Great. And how can anybody find you if they want more information?
Sure. So you can email me directly at pri@openlaw.io. But if you're interested in the LAO, just go to the LAO, LV, and then LAO.io. And we have an email and social media and everything there. So easy to get in touch.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us, Priyanka.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.